You'll find in your packet some membership information about AABPA. You can talk to me or Shelley McAllister against the wall if you have any questions. But we put together this series to give you guys a broad view of federal budgeting. I know you're all involved in budget in some manner, but we thought we'd give you an overview and then a look at some of the specific jobs that are available in federal budgeting for when you're finished with your programs. A little bit of housekeeping. We are trying to record today's sessions. So if you have any qualms about possibly being viewed later, stay out of Shelley's view.
Like if your boss doesn't know you're here.
Or if your boss thinks you're here and you need to prove it, see Shelley. You can get proof on tape. Other than that, today's session, first we have Professor Phil Joyce from the George Washington University. Professor Joyce teaches at the School for Public Policy and Public Administration. He focuses on the federal budget and integrating performance management and performance information in the budget process. Has co-authored a few books and several articles and chapters of books, and I will turn it over to him. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Melissa. I'm happy to be here. When Melissa asked me to come, I said, here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to do an overview of the federal budget process. And I'm definitely not going to do an overview of the federal budget process in an hour. I'm in the process of teaching a semester-long course, which is in fact an overview of the federal budget process, and I'll do it in as little as 2 hours, but 1 hour, I don't do that. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about some chronic budget problems, and that can take an hour itself. And talk a little bit about the presidential election and its relationship to the budget, and then a little bit about what to expect in a presidential transition. And I certainly expect that we'll have time available for questions at the end. Just a quick poll first. How many people here are currently summer interns at CBO? Okay. How many people are at OMB? How many people are somewhere else? Good. Say it. How many people didn't raise their hand at any of the 3 times? That's good. That's a good test. Thanks. That's my assistant. My second question is, how many of you are now graduate students or have completed a graduate degree? And how many people are undergraduates or just completed undergraduate? Okay. All right, last question, and I really will get started. How many people here have ever had a course in budgeting? Okay, a small number. Well, if you ever have the opportunity, you should take one. And hopefully at the end of, if not at the end of today, at least at the end of this entire series, if you come for more of these events, you will know why it is that you should do this. Just a couple of words in addition to what Melissa said about me. I'm actually someone who has both worked in budgeting and who teaches budgeting. I worked for the state of Illinois for 7 years, 4.5 years in the state budget office, and I actually worked at CBO for 5 years. So I kind of have one foot in academia and one foot in the world of practice. So I happen to think that that budgeting is pretty important, which is why I teach budgeting. And I'll tell you a little secret, which is that what passes for a compliment in my line of work when I get done teaching a budgeting class is something like, that wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. So I've learned over time to take that as a compliment, and that and that I benefit from low expectations. So that in fact if somebody teaches a class that has sort of a really sexy title, they're really just setting themselves up for failure. So I have learned over time to try to make the titles of my courses as boring as possible, even if the subject matter is not. But I think what you'll learn over time, and certainly if you spend much time in government, is that the budget process is really important, and that not understanding the budget process and working in government is sort of like starting your own business, but saying you can't be bothered learning about the market. Because the budget process is how resources get allocated, and it's really at the center of what's happening It won't necessarily be at the center of the debate on the presidential campaign, but I don't think that's the fault of the budget process. I think that's the fault of the presidential campaign, perhaps, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. As I said, what I'm going to do today is just spend a little bit of time talking about what the problems are that the federal budget process in particular faces, and also the presidential election and what we can expect in the transition. Now, here's the first test in any presentation. If I hit a button, does something good happen? All right, good. So I divided budgeting problems into two parts, one that I call policy and the other that I call process. The policy problems are really, kind of all in and around the fact that there's a lot of things out there that cost a lot of money and that we don't necessarily know how we're going to deal with all of them. The first one, and these are in no particular order, is the cost of the war, which, since we're in CBO, I'm sure I could find someone with a really precise number. But around 800 billion is not a bad number for, well, some people think it's a very bad number, but it's not a terribly inaccurate number in terms of the amount of money that we have spent over time. And that's just through fiscal year 2008. And of course, we have a debate in the presidential election about, whether we should leave and how soon we should leave. But even if we decided to leave the day after somebody was elected president, we'd still be spending money for a significant period of time, because you don't just pull the plug and then everybody leaves. And even after everybody leaves, you don't immediately stop spending money. So we're on the hook for a lot of money. And just to give you a feel for how much money, we're going to talk in a few minutes about earmarks, which some people think are a big problem. One estimate that I've seen of earmarks is that earmarks cost about $18 billion in the last fiscal year. $18 billion would pay for about a month of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So if you think that earmarks are a big problem and cost a lot of money, then you should think that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are really big problems and cost a whole lot of money. The second policy issue is the Bush tax cuts, and the question is not at this point, since we have two people running for president, both of whom want to extend the Bush tax cuts. The question is not whether they'll be extended. The question is, are they going to be extended for everybody? And for those of you who don't know the issue here, the Congress and the President, for a number of reasons that perhaps make a lot of procedural sense but don't make a lot of policy sense, set up these tax cuts so they phase in over a number of years and then they automatically disappear. And so that means that current law would have them just go away. But whoever happens to be the president and whoever happens to be in the Congress at that moment is not going to let that happen, and certainly not going to let that happen for everyone, because whoever is sitting there at that moment in time when all these tax cuts go away, they're going to experience a big tax increase. And no matter what anybody says about it not being a big tax increase, it's just what law currently says. If you're sort of sitting there paying taxes, you will think that it's a big tax increase, and politicians aren't going to let that happen, and that includes the two that are running for president. If we extend all of those tax cuts, it's actually quite expensive. If we extend some of them, then it's less expensive, and we'll look at that in a little while, because we're going to compare what Senator McCain and Senator Obama say they'd like to do. There's also this thing called the alternative minimum tax, which we won't go into in detail except to say that it's a shadow income tax that was supposed to make sure that really rich people didn't get away without paying their fair share in taxes, but it wasn't indexed for inflation, so people who don't consider themselves to be very rich are increasingly paying it. People in the middle class. Definition, middle class is where you happen to be at any given point in time. There's no standard definition of the middle class. Unless you know you're in the lower class, you're in the middle class. I mean, by some definition, Bill Gates probably thinks he's in the middle class. So people who are in the middle class are paying the alternative minimum tax now, more and more of them every year, which, when they discover that, makes them angry, because not only do they have to pay it, but it actually means that they have to do their taxes twice, because there's sort of two sets of rules to do your taxes. So the easy thing to do would be to get rid of it, except that it costs a lot of money to get rid of it, about $1 trillion over 10 years. And then, not coincidentally, we have these things called deficits, We used to have surpluses. I was alive when we had surpluses. I was actually alive when we had surpluses twice. We had a surplus in fiscal year 19.